inclusive my Realtor, and this is the Autism Podcast at Miami's community newspapers. Today, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about pediatric cancer with Oscar Ortiz, founder of SebastianStrong. Welcome to the podcast, Oscar. Tell me a little bit about yourself and about the Sebastian Foundation.
Thank you for having me, Victor. Foundation was started almost 9 years ago now after I lost my 16-year-old son to a rare form of cancer. Learned through the journey about the lack of funding, lack of innovation in the space, and his only treatment was over 40 years old. It kind of made me feel like I needed to do something, and didn't know what it was going to be, but here we are 9 years later with having an impact of over $6 million in research, helped hundreds of families and activities of the hospital, financial support and the like, and in the coming months, expanding some of the stuff we're doing. Really excited about being able to help others.
You know, I'm curious because there's a lot of cancer research going on. Why was this treatment 40 years old when your son went through it?
Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, childhood cancer is rare. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it is harder to study. But at the same time, and this sounds cynical, and I don't mean it to sound, it's not cynical, it's the reality is, not enough kids get cancer. So there's not investment in these rare diseases. They're not financially viable. So you don't get a lot of investment in it. There was a Super Bowl ad this past year. I think it was Pfizer. They had a child superhero coming out of treatment, which they know creates a pull in the heart. But when you dug in a little deeper, and this is not what the public knows, they assume, hey, they're working on childhood cancer. Their drug pipeline had, I think, 130 some odd cancer drugs. 4 were focused on pediatrics. So the majority of drugs being used on kids are adult drugs with significant side effects, because kids aren't small adults. They're developing, and the effects of these drugs are extremely long lasting. There's a stat out there. It's 95% of kids who've been childhood cancer survivors have some sort of significant health issue by the time they're 45. And it's sometimes secondary cancer, sometimes it's organ failure. There's a lot of people that need transplants. Very often they don't make it because of you're not supposed to live with radiation and these toxic treatments that long.
I'm curious. So the research funding now for pediatric, is it coming from the private sector or from organizations like yours?
There are, I say, 3 legs to the stool. Government is one, and historically the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, has had about a $5 billion budget, and historically 4% of that goes to pediatrics, which is about $200 million. Starbucks sells more coffee than that in 3 days, to give you perspective. Unfortunately, with some of the changes in Washington right now, that's being further cut. These cuts in NCI funding are having a more significant impact on childhood cancer. The second leg of the stool is pharma. And this isn't necessarily to beat up pharma. They have a responsibility to their shareholders. But I do think there's a humanitarian or ethical responsibility to help others. Since the inception of cancer drug development, there's been approximately 200 drugs developed for adults. There's been 7 developed specifically for kids. And as I shared earlier, the adult drugs are meant for adults. We need to be more innovative. The reality is we know that research works. If you look at what prostate cancer, breast cancer results and outcomes were 30, 40, 50 years ago, we are at a point now with not just through development of drugs, but diagnostic tools, we are now having much greater or much better, not just short-term outcomes, but long-term outcomes. So we need more from pharma, there's no doubt. And then the third leg of the stool are foundations like ours. And there's other fantastic foundations out there. Not as many focus on research. One of the large ones, and I get this all the time, I got the question several times when Sebastian was diagnosed, if you consider St. Jude. St. Jude is a wonderful organization. They absolutely are. One of the doctors on our scientific advisory board that counsels us on where to invest the money to fund research is from St. Jude. She's an amazing person. The organization's amazing. They save countless lives. But there is one disservice that they've caused or that they've brought to the pediatric cancer world, and that's creating the perception that they are the Amazon of childhood cancer. Everyone assumes you just call them. The commercials, just call us and we'll take care of everything. Number one, that's not true because they simply don't have the capacity. No one has the capacity. In this country alone, there's nearly 17,000 kids diagnosed every year. St. Jude has less than 80 inpatient beds. That's not a shot at them, but the perception
That's not
is
much.
it's not enough.
No.
It's not enough to take care of everybody, but everybody assumes that. And then the other part that as a parent who's gone through this, and any parent who's gone through the childhood cancer journey, the commercials are always kids smiling and a happy outcome. While that's wonderful for those that have that outcome, the reality is the journey is not all smiles. It's really hard to watch your child suffer through that. And then organizations even like the American Cancer Society, who I've raised money for. My mom's a breast cancer survivor. My mother-in-law's a breast cancer survivor. My wife had thyroid cancer. Wonderful organizations have done a lot of wonderful stuff, but historically less than 2% of what they raise goes to pediatrics. Yet 15 to 25% of the market material is kids, because you get a different response when you have a child. And I think they're getting better, but we need to hold these groups to account. If you're gonna use kids in your ads, in my opinion, you should put your money where your mouth is. If 15% of your 25%, whatever it is, you should have a commensurate amount focused for kids. So those are the three legs of the stool, and it makes it really difficult. And that's why organizations like ours play a role. We are effectively seed capital for a lot of these folks in labs because of all the other things I've shared. There's not a lot of money in it. So when these pediatric oncology researchers have an idea and want to put something out there, contrary to what the public thinks, that pharma's putting out money for these ideas, particularly for small population sizes, it's just not there. So organizations like ours play a role in that seed capital. And we've had a couple of instances where our money led to additional funding. So that's kind of the goal. If we can fund something that is a novel idea that gets to a point where you're like, all right, someone else may have an interest in taking this to the next level. That's really what we want to do is get new concepts and novel therapeutics out there.
Got it. Now, you mentioned that when parents get the diagnosis, many will call St. Jude's. Now, I'm in the autism world. So in the autism world, if you get the diagnosis, you can call Fiddlers, you can call Card, Easter Seals, parent to parent. So if a parent gets a new diagnosis of cancer, what are the first three calls? Who should they be calling?
First, and probably there's some similarities. There's a fog when you hear this. There's a little bit of disbelief.
Scary.
You're scared. All the emotions. So your ability to process becomes a little challenging. We are working on, and it's within the next month, I'll be able to share more, addressing some of those very questions, because very often now people will obviously go to the hospital, get counsel from their physicians, as we did. And then, first two places I went to here in Miami, they said there's only one treatment. It's 40 years old. As a Miami born and raised native, I thought these people don't know what they're doing. We're the fraud capital. We're the Medicare fraud capital, mortgage fraud. Like I was like, all right, there must be something and then had consultations with others, with Sloan Kettering, with MD Anderson, St. Jude. And they told me the same thing. Like, this is all there is. It was disheartening, but at the same time, it gave us. So you work with your medical professional, and then it takes some time, Victor, to figure out who to go to. And that's part of some of our efforts, is developing support through that, because the implications are serious when you go into treatment, assuming you're a two-person household, two-adult household. And if you have other children, obviously the diagnosis in and of itself is brutal.
Scary.
When you start to add the other elements, in which are, someone will likely have to stop working. One of the parents will have to stop working to give full-time care. And then what does that mean for the care of your other children and the family dynamic? Because it's incredibly disruptive. And this is all assuming that you have a treatment facility within driving distance, which is not the case for many people. And like I said, one of the things we're working on is getting people access to these things, because if you look at the state of Florida, there's over, I think it's 21 million people. Nearly, if your child's diagnosed with cancer, there's a 16, 17 children's hospitals that have at least one oncologist and work with the COG, which is who puts together the trials, the Children's Oncology Group. But if you have any sort of complexity, you've got to go to Jacksonville, Gainesville, Tampa, Orlando, or Miami.
Okay, Miami's on the list.
That's it. But my point is, if you are diagnosed, like people think, I tell people, like Naples, very, very wealthy community. If you have a child who's sick, you're going to have to leave Naples. There's not. Fort Myers has a hospital that can offer some high level, but if it's a complex circumstance, you're going to have to go elsewhere. And the level of disruption that brings for a family, even financially, we often think, if I had to pay another $100 a week in gas, It would be uncomfortable. I don't like it, but I'm not making the kinds of decisions that so many of these people have to make, which means if I have to spend another $100 in gas, this means there's $100 less of food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know that the public fully appreciates. And when your child is sick, to add this kind of financial stress, we all know that financial stress is one of the greatest causes of families being broken up. You add this to it, a medical issue, and it's, I'm sure there's similarities in the autistic world when
There is.
when you have to, to get early intervention very often, to get private therapy is expensive. It creates, you have to dedicate time to it because you also have to follow through with the things being done. It's a financial burden and it's a disruptive burden in your household. So it's a really tough thing for families going through it. So we do a little bit of this kind of one-off. Yesterday I had a conversation with a family who's going through it, and you kind of give them the human side. A lot of what you do with families is, look, breathe in, because there isn't a prescriptive answer. You can't tell somebody, here's the 1, 2, 3s. That's not how it works. Your 1, 2, 3 is different than their 1, 2, 3. So it's, you really rely on the medical experts, but you gotta, for a lot of the support stuff, you've got to do a lot of that stuff on your own, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'll say about the family dynamic. My wife is a principal caregiver with my daughter who's autistic, and it was actually my sister. She told me years ago, you know what? She's got a really tough job, tougher than you can imagine. So you just need to be, XYZ for your wife. So, and I can only talk to the men because I'm a man.
Right.
I had to really step up for my wife. And then by stepping up for her, I stepped up for the whole family, right, for our daughter, for our boy. But so I'm just throwing that out there as far as the family dynamic.
No doubt.
We got to step up. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier, and also on your website, that a big focus of SebastianStrong is on less toxic treatments.
Yep.
Is that something you're working on, or do they exist already?
A lot of the treatments are, and I'll give you the perfect example is Sebastian at some point in his treatment was given a drug called doxorubicin. Its nickname is the Red Devil. Almost looks like Gatorade. Stereotypically Hispanic family. We had like 10 people in the hospital. This is done over 5 days. It's highly toxic. So, as it's given, it's also being flushed out. You need to be monitored. He had to have an ultrasound of his heart before this was administered to make sure, because they expect damage to be done to the heart. My father-in-law accidentally hooked the line and pulled it out, and it spilled over the floor. And to watch the response of the nurses and the hospital, we had to evacuate the room. They came in with what is equivalent hazmat type suits, completely covered, because the toxicity of the drug it's not okay for it to touch your skin, but we're pumping this directly into a child's heart. That makes no sense to me. We've got to be better than that. So these drugs cause so many side effects that, again, it's what we have. We need to invest in more. And I think we're seeing some of that with immunotherapy. This precision therapy that we're talking about is getting a better understanding of each particular cancer, because the reality is you and I can be diagnosed with the same cancer, same staging, go through the same treatment, and have two very different outcomes because we're unique.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to understand that more. And I think that's a critical part of the next phase of discovery, is understanding what's specific to this individual's cancer, and then addressing that. There's someone at FIU, Dr. Azam, who's doing some incredible work in that space, and developing precision treatments for kids based on their specific diagnosis. So, and harnessing the immune system to make some of this happen. So it's unfortunate. The reality is 50, 60 years ago, before we started even using chemotherapy, it was a certain death sentence. So while chemo has certainly served its purpose, and for certain diagnoses, that may be what works. There are several cancers that maybe are more advanced. Chemotherapy has limited efficacy with incredibly harsh side effects. Sebastian lost, when diagnosed, he was 6'1", 145 pounds, a runner. When he finished treatment, it was down to 100 pounds. It's brutal. It's destructive. We've got to find better than that.
I saw a photo of your boy on the website, and it was him running. very healthy kid. I'm curious, number 35 on his jersey, what is that? What is that about?
It was, he was a long line of Columbus people. I went to Columbus. My three brothers went to Columbus, and my three boys went there. He was a cross-country runner. That was his, 35 was his number. So it was just a means to honor him, and very often it's a way to differentiate, Victor. People ask about what the 35 is.
Mm-hmm.
Your hat. You're more direct. Autism dad. Ask me about it because it's important to me. So the 35 became a piece of people saying, what's that? And then it leads into the conversation. And lets me talk about him because that's an important part of the foundation personally,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily what we do, but personally there's, I don't know who to credit this, but it's said a long time ago. And it was, we die not the day that we stop breathing. We die the day that people stop speaking about us.
Okay.
And that was that hit me hard when I heard that. And it also felt empowering because I know that as long as I'm alive, I will talk about Sebastian. And, all of this stuff didn't exist before, but it's all related to him. And it's ambiguous enough that people ask questions. And then I'm like, all right, now you're going to hear the story and you're going to hear about Sebs and what we do.
Great.
So yeah, that the 35 was just, how do we honor him? How do we create something that creates a little more mystery, if you will, and then awareness.
I see you with the logo. I wear my hat, and I got to tell you that this has sparked a lot of conversations and connections that I wouldn't have made otherwise.
Correct.
And valuable connections to the community. So I would tell other parents out there, wear it with pride, whatever it is.
100%. And awareness is the biggest challenge because even in autism, one of the biggest challenges in pediatric cancers, and I feel this fundamentally, if people aren't aware that there's a problem, no one's looking for solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And very often pediatric cancer, as I said, people assume St. Jude's taking care of it. We've got this. But then when I'm able to explain what the landscape is and go in a little bit, people are shocked. And I always tell them, now you can't unknow what I just shared. You can act on it or not act on it, but you can't pretend you don't know anymore. And I don't fault them because I didn't know any of this before, as I'm sure in your case, you were aware peripherally of what autism was, but there's no way you could appreciate what that meant, until unfortunately you were knee deep in it. And now you're like, all right, wow. So educating people, and that's what part of what that cap does, is gets people to learn more about it and also brings community together because there's a lot of people who are going through different things, and there's, someone else is going to come to you that wouldn't have come up to you otherwise and say, hey, I have a child that is struggling through it. And here are the things that have helped us. And for you to be able to share, hey, these are the things that have helped us. And here are some resources that you may not be aware of otherwise. And bringing that to light, I think, is ultimately going to help the community.
And I'll say that one of the things that has helped me a lot as a dad is plug into the system. Like at UM-CARD, there's this group called Just for Dads, and it's autism dads, and we meet about once a month. So I would tell parents, whatever the diagnosis is, it's not just care for the kids, it's care for the caregivers as well, because we've all got the autism diagnosis. You've all got the cancer diagnosis.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned that there's 16 to 17 hospitals. Is that statewide? In Florida.
Children's hospitals.
Right, children's. Okay.
Yeah.
How many in Dade County?
Dade County children's hospitals, dedicated children's hospitals.
Yeah.
It's Nicholas and Holtz. Baptist still does some treatment, and they have a wonderful doctor there who works at, but they no longer have inpatient services for pediatric cancer. So they do some treatment like at their cancer institute, but so it's really two hospitals. You have Joe D up in Broward, but
Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah, there's not money in pediatrics, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Pediatrics is not a
blessing and a curse.
Correct. Yeah. We're you don't want more, but at the same time, it's challenging
when it's needed
from a business perspective.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, it is. And as I mentioned earlier, when you spread out throughout the state, the resources are limited for. And that, we're talking about pediatric cancer, but for a variety of services, where the technical expertise is needed.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, that's one of the reasons in Florida, we have so many people come down
Mm-hmm.
to South Florida for treatment at these facilities. And even, the other part that the rest of the world may not appreciate is this is also the hub for the Caribbean and much of South America.
Yes, it is.
When there's individuals or kids who are sick, so many of them have to come here for treatment because the resources or the expertise simply isn't available where they are.
Now, we're seeing how Miami's falling short, but where is Miami stepping up?
I mean, I don't know so much that Miami's falling short. I wouldn't want to say that as a generalization. I think it's more across the board. We're falling short because this isn't a priority. And, the average age of diagnosis for a child is between 9 and 10 years old. The average age of diagnosis for cancer for an adult is mid-60s. I've often shared this, we often quantify, we say since life expectancy is in the late 70s, early 80s for adults, when an adult is diagnosed, we're saving 15 years, if you will, of life. For a child, the potential is to save 70 years of life.
Decades.
And it's not just the numbers. It's what I share with people. It's the life experiences that are more difficult. Like, I'll be 55 this year. The only thing left on my bucket list is to be a grandfather. I have 2 other boys, not in a hurry for it, but that's the last thing left on my bucket list of life. And what I mean by that is, the moments in life where you got your first car, you graduate from high school, you go to college, you get your first job, first love, then maybe you get married, you buy a home, you have children, professional success, all of these things that define us through our life. My son got a car. The rest of it didn't happen. If I died today, as tragic as it would be, I've lived life.
Yeah, you have.
And I'd be missing out on the grandchild, which would suck. But look at all these other moments that didn't occur. So we have to invest more, not so much Miami, but in general, to help kids. And instead of, to use economic terms, we've traditionally taken a top-down approach. This is what works for adults. This drug works for adults. Let's see if it works for kids, and we use it there. Let's develop drugs for kids whose goal it is to create 60, 70 years more of life, and then use that on adults and let them live longer. But let's do more for kids, because what we do know undoubtedly is that research works. Investing in research works. Think about what life expectancy was 100 years ago, 150 years ago. We're talking 30 years old, 40 years old, for a variety of reasons. There was war, but disease was a big part of it. All these investments in things that would otherwise, and I would apply this to autism and to so many other areas. The more we learn, the more we know, our ability to bring about change or better conditions, whether it be diagnostics, earlier diagnostics, or better treatment options, grows, and we have better outcomes. I don't believe there's anything we're not capable of as a society when we put forth our effort. I mean, we put people on the moon.
We're going to go to Mars soon.
Yeah, we've got a telephone that does whatever. It's a mini computer that does things that would be unimaginable not 100 years ago, 20 years ago. You're like,
of course,
so we're capable of all this. It's just a function of, I think, focusing the efforts of others. So, and that's not, going back to the original question, not just Miami. I think that's a broader societal issue.
The question, the family dynamic. You mentioned you have 2 other boys.
Yep.
When they're never going to get over this, because this is really tough. Was there a system in place, support groups, something like that for the boys when they were going through this?
There are some groups out there that offer psychosocial care. We were, and I always careful how I say this, Victor, we were fortunate as one is in this situation, and I tell people that we had a reputable treatment facility 15 minutes from our house. All of our family lives here. My wife was able to stop working full-time. I had incredible flexibility through my employer at the time, who gave me the opportunity to do everything that I needed to. Sebastian was first. I would cancel trips when they were coming up. Hey, Sebastian's got a treatment. We could focus all of our efforts. Family being here and friends being here allowed for the support system to expand for our boys. And then Rose and I would alternate nights at the hospital. So one night she would stay with Sebastian, and the next night I would stay, just to create the balance. But with all of those advantages, it was still incredibly disruptive. The example I always say is, when you have one of these significant medical issues come in the family, it's almost like a bomb goes off and everyone gets hit with shrapnel. Those who are closest to it are more seriously injured, but my boys are in that periphery. They got hit too. And the difficulty for them, and it's one of things that I'm still working through is the guilt that comes because my boys not just lost their brother, they have different parents now. I mean, I'm broken, maybe I'm repairing, but I'm different. And doesn't change how much we love them. But the guilt was there even when Sebastian was being treated because of the amount of attention we needed to give to Sebastian, to tell my other two boys, guys, I'm sorry. I need you to know that if it were you, we'd be by your side. This is not a Sebastian. We prefer Sebastian or we love Sebastian more. It's just he's the one that needs us more. And if you were the one that needed us more, we would be by your side. That guilt is still there. And when I talk to parents, and I'm sure there's elements of that at times for you with your boy, because you have to dedicate as much time as you do, because it's not fair, but it's what you have to do. And that's hard. That comes with challenges. So we were fortunate, but there needs to be more support. Because the other challenge that comes with this is there isn't, since the patient is, I'm sure in autism as well, the patient is your daughter. It's not you. So there's no medical billing, even though this medical issue is creating a challenge for everybody in the household. It is a diagnosis that impacts everybody. There isn't a method for you to access that individually.
No.
So you have to pay out of pocket. And that's something that most people can't do. I mean, I paid for a therapist out of pocket. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. I will tell you that as I talk to parents, they don't have many don't have the resources for that because it's expensive. And the fact that support isn't there is a gap again in the treatment. So yeah, it impacts everybody. And the boys were able to have access to that through time because we were able to give it to them. And I think that's been incredibly important. But like I said, we were fortunate as hard as that was.
Yeah, I can tell you that the financial aspect, when I go to my men's group, that's like 80% of the conversation. Therapy, whatever it is, it's just the health insurance company's not paying or dragging their feet. It's just a major part of the conversation. I don't even know what the answer is. People are like, what's the solution? I don't know what it is.
It's reform, but that's a bigger picture. But it's
long-term.
It's reform.
Picture.
It's reform because that is part of the care that's necessary. No one will. That needs to be part of the care.
Yes.
And even post when you have a traumatic circumstance like the loss of a child, bereavement care. I mean, there's the ongoing care is hard.
Yeah, we're almost running out of time.
Yep.
I want to touch on another very great thing that you guys are doing, and it's the Superhero Lounge at Holtz Children's. Tell me about that.
That was a wonderful opportunity with the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, their leadership group, their young professionals. We partnered with them and Holtz Children's Hospital to redo the bone marrow transplant family room, which is for the average person that may not know, that is a room that can only be used by one family at a time because the people on that floor, the individuals on that floor, have had a bone marrow transplant, which means think of an iPhone being reset and completely clean.
Immunocompromised.
Yeah,
right?
They're immunocompromised. So their immune system's depleted to zero. They get a bone marrow transplant and then they have to start to recover. And there's a lot of health risks that come through that period of time. It was an old room, 30 to 40 years old. It hadn't been updated. Old TV, doesn't have streaming capabilities, didn't have the proper gaming system. So the couches were kind of old. It was so in partnership with this group and some wonderful sponsors and volunteers, we were able to completely update that room, work with a muralist who did a beautiful mural on the wall that the patients and the nurses at the hospital were able to, it was paint by numbers. They filled it out. It was a really special experience. They were like, let's do another one. I'm like, all right, we're going to talk about it, but it's not something we can do right away. But it was a really incredibly rewarding experience. And the first person to ring the bell there happened to be by chance a family that we're really close to, Jake the Victorious Warrior.
And he's on your website.
Yeah, he's an amazing young man. And that was incredibly special. So if we can make the lives of these people, that's really the goal, Victor, is make the lives of these people, bring them hope through the research investments we're making, and through the activities we host at hospitals or something like the Superhero Lounge. It's trying to make things a little bit better. As in your case, that it's there's no silver bullet. Unfortunately, our society wants silver bullets. They want a medication or a therapy. It's like, oh, we fixed it. No, it's a really hard, complex problem. So it's going to take more work. But in the interim, if we can create special moments for people, provide moments of hope and joy, that's what we can do. And I can tell you is incredibly invaluable. I know it was invaluable to me with some of the music therapy that Sebastian went through. He loved to play guitar. And I'm sure in your case, when people do things for your daughter, and it's those moments, the long term, this is hard, but you bring in moments of normalcy and joy, they're priceless.
They are. And, life is in those moments. And I don't want to sound flippant, but hope, I think, in cancer is a very strong medicine. Yep. I really think that. Now, Oscar, down to our last 2 minutes. I want to ask you, I found a few questions. Yep. Biggest myth about pediatric cancer you want to retire?
That it's incredibly underfunded. That St. Jude isn't the only answer, that we need more than that. If St. Jude was that great, Victor, my son would be alive. No one person or one institution is going to figure this out. It's going to take a collaborative effort to move this along and significant investments.
Yes. Now, finish this line. If Miami does X this year, outcomes for kids change.
Miami. It's hard for me to just say Miami because this is a global issue. But Miami, it's just create more awareness. Come to our gala on November 8th. Learn more and help us, raise more money to help kids.
Yeah. And by the way, the gala I saw on the website, that will be in the show link. So if people want to go to that, I will be there. So that will be
fantastic.
Definitely something that people need to go to. Yes. Third question. One story that keeps you going on the hard days.
This is going to take a little longer, Victor, but I am going to tell you. When we got to the end and we had to tell our son that there were no more curative options, it was the hardest. It was the hardest conversation. It was the hardest moment in this entire journey. And I tell people harder than when he passed. Because my job was a cheerleader through the entire journey. And then there was a sense of failure when we got to the point when they said, there's no more curative options. So my wife and I had to go in the room and tell him, Sebs, there's nothing else. And I'll never forget his word. He goes, for real, Dad? That was the hardest thing. We gathered ourselves for 10, 15 minutes. We cried. And he then says to us, okay, we're going to go home and wait for a miracle. We're going to hope for our miracle. And I get to tell everyone else. You guys, I ask that you don't tell anybody else, that our friends and family, that I'm the one that communicates. And I watched him tell his brothers, my parents, my in-laws, his friends, some of the nurses, that there were no more curative options. He was going to go home and wait for his miracle. And I watched him comfort as people broke down. The person who was facing their mortality is a 16-year-old comforting everyone else. It is my fuel at every moment when we all go through challenges and moments where it's hard. And then I think of that, like to be able to do that. And not just as a 16-year-old, as a human, to face your mortality with that grace and say, okay, it's not about me. It is what drives me every single day to do what I do. Like if I can watch him do that, and I've seen other children in the strength that they exhibit, that's my fuel. I will forever remember that, and it will always drive me.
When I first started this podcast, it was all about autism. Obviously, that's my story. But then I started meeting parents like you, and I started calling it it's more the disabilities podcast. And then now it's like disabilities and illness and cancer, whatever, because these kids, there's so many things going on, and it's beyond autism. And I think a lot of times that autism overshadows many other very pressing needs, like the cancer. Because before you came on board, I was like that person thinking, well, Joe DiMaggio, Nicholas, St. Jude's, it's all good.
Right.
And it's not. And we're falling short. Yep. Okay. Let's turn to the camera and we'll sign off. This has been the Autism Podcast with Oscar Ortiz of SebastianStrong. Remember, their gala's coming up in November. The link will be in our show notes.